Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you, Mr. Howarth. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I'd like to pay tribute once again to my honourable friend Blaenau Gwent for securing this debate and for all the work he's doing. The transfer of steelworker pensions out of BSPS has been an issue that he and I have been working on since 2017, which was when all of Tata's steelworkers were forced to decide whether to move into the BSPS 2 or to transfer out into another pension scheme. Given the level of trust between employees and employer was so fragile at that point, to say the least, it's not too much of a surprise, and completely understandable in fact, that around 8,000 of the steelworkers decided against joining the BSPS 2. But little did they know that the vultures were circling. And what was completely inexcusable was the behaviour of those unscrupulous financial advisors who ripped off these men and their families. The sheer size of the pension transfer exercise, the high level of publicity the transfer received, and the workers' deep-seated mistrust in the employer at that time, the trustees and Tata made for fertile territory for the parasites. The trade unions, steel MPs and the BSPS trustees all called upon the government to introduce a system of deemed consent regarding the transfer of BSPS 2, including myself in the letter that I sent to the then Pensions Minister, David Gauke. But we were ignored. Instead, these hard-working, honest men were targeted, when only in a very small number of cases was transferring out, in fact, the best option for those particular individuals. Now, these unscrupulous advisors are not stupid. In fact, they've behaved in a cunning, morally bankrupt, and in many cases, criminal manner. These events have had a dreadful effect on the steelworkers and families in my constituency. Take one man who transferred £560,000 out on the strength of a 40-minute phone call with an advisor, quote-unquote, who convinced him that it was what everyone was doing. 40 years of service reduced to 40 minutes on the telephone. He believed that he was charged £11,000 to transfer out for a 40-minute consultation, a man's entire life plan ruined by one phone call. Another was advised to transfer £348,858 out by one of the local advisors. He is now paying in excess of £3,500 per year in various costs and charges, as well as exposing himself to the risk of shortfall and dying after his pension pot runs out. The advisor played on the fear that BSPS was going to go into administration. They did not present him with the facts or evidence, but approached the situation from the starting point that he wanted to transfer out and went about facilitating that without checking that it was in his best interest to do so. So who were these unscrupulous financial advisors? The main culprit has been Active Wealth UK Limited and a man named Darren Reynolds. They account for all but a couple of the 77 cases that have so far been taken up with the Financial Services Compensation Scheme. The FSCS has paid out £1.8 million so far to 61 of the 77 claimants. 16 of these exceeded the £50,000 compensation limit, which has since risen to £85,000. For those who haven't been granted compensation, it is purely because they haven't suffered a loss, not because they weren't badly advised. I think I'm right in saying that every single one was judged to have been badly advised. But what has been clear for some time now is that Active Wealth UK was just the tip of the iceberg. We also know that several other advisors have been acting inappropriately. There's one who did a lot of work in concert with a financial advisor who didn't have the required permissions. The transfers were going through in about 1 hour. Some steelworkers never even met with an advisor. Then, in another part of Wales, in West Wales, they had the required permissions, but by the end of 2017, they'd had their pensions permissions to do transfers revoked. Scores of steelworkers were days away from the transfer cut-off when that advisor circled in. Other advisors saw the writing on the wall and went into voluntary liquidation a few months ago. Those two advisors took their clients with them literally next door. Other sales tactics were entirely risible. People turning up at their offices of advisors over the weekend because he had told steelworkers that on Monday the pension company would be stopping distributing it in the UK. He was literally telling them to hurry up and buy. He spent 30 minutes talking to each steelworker about their pension. What's notable is that these financial advisors are finding it easier simply to lock up shop, close their business down, and walk away than to face up to what they have done. This, in effect, then limits the redress steelworkers can receive to £50,000, now up to £85,000, of course, under the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, and from £150,000 under the Financial Ombudsman Service. So, in effect, we have a deep structural problem in the system with that these financial advisors can simply lock up shop and walk away rather than give redress to the people that they've ripped off. And that, I think, is a fundamental question for the regulator. These men were not just let down by rogue financial advisors. They have been let down by the authorities, the regulator, namely the Financial Conduct Authority, and by the government. The FCA was far too slow to see the obvious risks and far too slow to act and protect steelworkers from these vultures. They knew from their own investigation in 2017 that over half of the transfer advice being given wasn't up to their own standards, but even that apparently did not raise any alarm bells or any red flags. Yet what was most shocking was that certain financial advisors who were under investigation still appeared on the FCA website. The fact that this information was unavailable to the steelworkers feels utterly unjust. The focus now is to raise awareness among these steelworkers who have not spoken up, but who would be due compensation, and to ask them to come forward and seek advice. And I think one of the things that we would all observe is the issue of shame in all of this. Many of these steelworkers have been deeply embarrassed and shamed by the fact that they've been ripped off. They found it extremely difficult to share this difficult information with their families, with their spouses. And that's one of the reasons I think that more have not come forward, because they don't want to see what they're so afraid of what they might see when they look under the rock. I recognise that this is an emotionally sensitive matter for those involved who may be reluctant to overturn and look for what they might find underneath. But it is absolutely right that we do everything that we can to get justice for these men. Investment companies and self-invested personal pension providers must no longer be able to look the other way and to adopt a see no evil, ask no questions, tell no lies approach, as long as the money continues to roll in. That approach is morally bankrupt. Since the end of 2017, I've been working with my honourable friends for Blaenau Gwent, for Gower, and with lawyers from and independent financial advisors in order to bang the drum and to get these steelworkers the justice that they deserve. In November, 18 steelworkers came to Westminster to meet the regulators and the FSCS, and we were pleased that the FSCS was able to revisit some of those advisor charges. We have also had very welcome promises from the FCA to run seminars in Port Talbot. Tata have also shown a willingness to facilitate meetings with the men, all in the cause of raising awareness. This means we can be optimistic, at least, that getting these men some of the justice they deserve may be possible. Looking forward, I believe that our main focus must be, first, to continue to raise awareness among these steelworkers who may be affected. All firms which gave advice to transfer should verifiably send out a letter written by the FCA strongly advising them to get the advice looked at, reminding them that they may be entitled to a form of financial top-up if they come forward. We'll keep pressing the FSCS and FCA to offer the level of compensation package that the men who have come forward deserve and are due. We'll also focus relentlessly on making sure that these unscrupulous advisors are exposed for what they are, and that every bit of insurance that they owe is claimed. Second, we must do all we can to achieve legislative change. We need to ensure that individuals are automatically enrolled in new schemes, not left to be picked off mercilessly by these rogue financial advisors in an environment that is characterized by uncertainty. Thirdly, we need to make sure regulators do their jobs. Why those regulators I mentioned were allowed to remain, why those advisors that I mentioned were allowed to remain on the FCA website while under investigation needs seriously looking into. And on a final point, it's worth noting that this is an issue not just affecting steelworkers. It's worth noting that pension mis-selling payouts in 2018 hit a whopping £40 million, double the figure for 2017. This is a national issue across many sectors, and it's up to the FCA to stand up, and the government to stand up and stick by workers and pensioners who have been wrongly advised, and do all they can to improve regulation and legislation for future generations. I look forward to working with those in this room on all of those challenges, and I thank you for the attention.